primary school teachers of Reddit. What is the most shocking display of psychopath-like behavior you've seen? Story 1A grade 1 student said he had killed 2 bunnies and some birds. He wrote about it in his journal. It drew a picture. Sure enough, the carcasses were found in the playground at recess. When we asked him why he did it, he said he wanted to know what it would feel like to kill something. Story 2, another student, grade 5, was sent to a sort of timeout room after a huge fight. He wasn't getting any attention after pushing over all the furniture, so he decided to in all 4 corners of the room. His mom finally came to pick him up and screamed at me for making him do this and call me a. He had a speech impediment and kept repeating her, except he said "cunk" over and over again. The speech teacher part of me really wanted to say "cunt," T like table. Story 3, my wife is a teacher. About 10 years ago, a student took apart a pencil sharpener and removed the razor blade, cut a groove in the back of a pencil, slid the razor into it, used rubber bands to secure it, and tried to slice her with it. Story 4, my pregnant sister-in-law works with a child who is pretty crazy. He doesn't take his meds some days, and he will often draw pictures of killing things and blood everywhere. Sometimes he'll tell the teachers, "This is you, and there is blood everywhere." The other day, she was helping him, and he was frustrated, so he stabbed her with a pencil, and then right after that went to hit her stomach, and she deflected the hit and said, "You can't hit, especially my stomach. Do you know why?" And the freaking kid goes, "Yeah, because you have a baby in there. I hope it dies. This kid is in 1st grade. TLDR kid, tried to abort my sister-in-law's baby." Story 5, oh dear. Where to begin? Hey, raise one that comes to mind. Kindergarten girl had a pair of scissors. I turned just in time to see her reach over and try to cut off another girl's ponytail. Not a major thing, because no cutting actually happened, but when I asked her why she was going to do that, because they normally got along very well, she said, in a simple, very straightforward tone of voice, because her hair is what she loves the most. Sent chills up my spine. Story 6, I'm not a teacher myself, but my best friend works as a teaching assistant in a small primary school. She used to tell me about a little boy who would constantly give death stares to teachers and would generally refuse to interact with other children. My friend absolutely loves kids, but even she admitted she had never seen a child look so angry all of the time, like he hated the world even though he was so young. He would face the wall during class time and repeatedly bash his head against the wall until staff intervened. He started biting a lot of the children and was told off for doing so in the dining hall one day. He then jabbed the dinner lady in the arm with his fork so hard that it drew blood. In my friend's classroom, they had a small incubator with little chicks and that the children would help to look after and watch as they grew up. At one point, he was left unattended and managed to squeeze one of the poor chicks to death. I don't know whatever happened with him because my friend got a job at another school, but the story has always stuck in my mind. The way she described him genuinely gave me chills. Story 7, went to school with a kid who enjoyed mumbling crazy things to himself all during class and in the hallways. Always felt bad for the guy and did my best to be nice to him. Theme, he regularly got caught writing hit lists and threatening to kill girls because none of them loved him. Surprisingly, it looks like he's doing a lot better now. Story 8, my wife is a substitute teacher. I drop her off to teach 2nd grade class in a downtown elementary school. These kids were the angriest students she ever met, and she used to teach in NYC. The moment class started, they beat the ever-living out of each other, to the point that there was clumps of hair on the ground. She was also 6 months pregnant, and one student ran into her belly, causing her to cry. She had called the office over and over, and eventually said she wouldn't work in this class. They switched her to 1st grade. Phew. Better write, nope, there were worse. She threatened to move the temperature down on the behavior thermometer if they continue, which she eventually followed through. This caused meltdown city. They actually threw a desk at her. 1st grade kid throwing a desk at a pregnant lady. When I picked her up, she burst into tears and was shaking. She said if she had driven there herself, she would have just left. I wish she would have called me. I would have left work to get her. Took that school off the subcall list. Story 9, I'm not sure whether this is your standard of psychopath, but once I saw a 5-year-old boy cycling round and around his mom on a tricycle. He was pointing and laughing at her. His mom was sitting in the middle of the floor, crying her eyes out and biting herself, which I later discovered was self-harming. Little for Brains had wound his mom up to a point where she was crying, and then taunted her for self-harming. Story 10, a guy in my primary school once snuck up behind the teacher and cut her ponytail off. The same kid also threw our pet hamster against the wall and then stomped his foot on its head. This killed the hamster. Story 11, 1st grade boy, about 7 years old, ginger, chubby, pretty cute little dude, sitting fairly quietly at his desk. I look closer, and he is slowly pressing the point of his pencil into the top of his hand, then lifting it to see the indentation it has made in his skin. He does this a number of times, pressing a little harder each time. Then he looks over at the kid next to him, who is quietly writing in his workbook, one hand flat on the table in front of him, and bang, he stabs his pencil into the top of the other kid's hand. Cue instant screaming from the poor little guy, who all of a sudden has a pencil solidly standing up in his skin, and little ginger guy is just sitting there looking slightly baffled at the crying, but entirely pleased as punch. Story 12, not a teacher. My girlfriend is a mental health case manager for kids, though she just was assigned a 5-year-old girl who hasn't been diagnosed with anything yet. However, she has several people working with her because she has killed a few animals, just cuts them in half while they're alive. I think so far it's been a fish and 2 rabbits. Story 13, my wife is a teacher, and I volunteered her class. I want to say this was her 1st grade class, but it could have been kindergarten. Anyways, one little girl was just messed up, really bad family life and all that. She didn't know how to speak normally. She always yelled everything. A few times that year, she just started throwing desks and chairs. She would routinely just talk about people for no reason. Whenever I volunteered there, she'd call me ugly, bald, and fat in the span of 2 hours, running away after each insult. She was just a really mean, up child. Story 14, back in 6th grade. We had a cage of guinea pigs and a tank of fish that we had groups assigned to look after them. Groups would be rotated, so that everyone at some point had a chance to look after the class pets. There was one kid, let's call him PJ, and his group was assigned to the guinea pigs. One morning, just as class is starting, we see one of the guinea pigs floating at the top of the fish tank. Dad, we were all pretty distraught, all being 11, except for PJ. He didn't try to deny it, but when asked about it, he stared our teacher in the eyes and said, I just wanted to see how it looked while it struggled to survive. From then on, the classrooms were locked until the teachers opened them. PJ was made to go to the counselor after that. This was back in 2001. PJ added me on Facebook a few months ago. By all accounts, he seems normal now, but yeah, certainly had the short odds for class psycho back then. Story 15, not a teacher, but have been in childcare on and off for years, currently off. I worked the daycare at a gym in high school, and there I met the 2 most psycho kids I've ever met before or since. Keep in mind that I was daycare director for a homeless mission at 1.2, lots of kids coming in with issues. But no, 2 spoiled rich kids at the gym were the worst. The first was Brad. Brad has a younger brother and sister, both dark-haired and petite, both very smart and kind. Brad was their opposite in every way. He was huge for his age, blonde, of average intelligence, and pure evil. I had to pry him off of other kids all the time. His younger siblings were constantly covered in bruises because he would beat on them mercilessly. Several bite and bruise reports were written. Because of this kid, he drew awful pictures of blood and guts coming out of people, said evil things like, one day, it'll get big enough that no one can stop me from hurting people. Once I left to use the restroom, leaving only 5 kids in the care of my assistant. And the moment I left, Brad got another kid in a headlock, and my assistant couldn't get him off. This is a 5 years old we're talking about. Full-grown adult couldn't get him off this other kid. Staff started screaming for me. But before I could get my pants up, the other kid passed out from lack of air. Huge in suit, of course. Parents were told they couldn't bring Brad back. I think his parents ended up having to send him to a boarding school for special needs kids because his violence was so out of hand that CPS was going to take the younger 2 away. Great parents, really. But that kid had issues they just couldn't control. The other was one of 2 sisters. Jessica, the older, was the crazy one. Both girls attended the gym childcare, both absolute spoiled brats. But I didn't know the extent of Jessica's issues until I started babysitting them at home as well. They lived in a bi-level or split-level house. The kind where the main living area is half a flight up from the front door, usually a bedroom, living room, and utility area is half a flight down with a sunken garage attached. Their house was just like this. These girls were so spoiled that, at 6 and 7, the bottom floor was entirely theirs. They had their own living room, bathroom, and bedroom, complete with leather furniture and the latest in big-screen TVs. At some point, they had to move the younger one's bedroom into a curtained-off corner of the living room because Jessica kept trying to smother her in her sleep. They had a dog, and the parents warned me to keep it outside or away from Jessica at all times. Why? They'd already been through 2 cats, a few hamsters, and several fish, all of which Jessica killed in one way or another. She had been known to cut, beat, and burn the poor dog, but they wouldn't find it another home. Once, neither wanted to eat the disgusting-looking casserole that their mom had left for dinner. No biggie. I made them sandwiches with veggies and fruit instead. This is the point that I should mention that Jessica was very obese for her age. After eating 2 adult-sized sandwiches and everything else, she wanted more food. I told her that Shed had plenty for the moment. Maybe would have a snack in a little while and watch a movie. This sent her into an absolute rage. Kicking, screaming, banging her head. The works, bro. I sent her stomping off to her room downstairs. About a minute later, I'm at the sink with my back to the stairs and I hear a squeak of floorboards. I turn around a split second before a golf driver, old solid, kind, smashed me in the back of the skull. This girl had gone downstairs, and in less than a minute decided to get one of her dad's golf clubs out of the garage, sneak back upstairs, and brain me with it, the whole time laughing her head off about how no one would miss me when I died. I stopped watching them after that, but years later, when they would have been 11 and 10, I saw them at Target in the Halloween aisle, and Jessica full-on punched her mother in the face over a costume wig. The mom already had one black eye, and her younger sister just stood there silently immune to her sister's rages. Story 16, okay, am not really answering the question well, but this is related. I still don't know if this story is true, but allegedly this one girl and a few of her friends were in 3rd grade. I was in 5th at the time, sneaked away from school, and came across an old lady's house. They were playing out some adventure, so they decided the old lady was a witch, and they attacked her, beat her up like really badly shoved dog in her mouth, tied her to a chair, and then they found her cat and murdered it in front of her by swinging it into the walls. Fast forward to maybe a month ago, and I overhear this girl telling the story to one of her friends and laughing like it's the funniest thing in the world. No remorse, just an attitude of, oh well, kids will be kids. Story 17, a friend of mine used to teach kids with behavioral issues. She was about 7 months pregnant. One of the kids decided she didn't want her to have the baby. She waited until the teacher's aide walked out of the room to attack her, push her to the ground, and started kicking her stomach as hard as she could. Other students started yelling and helped pull her away. My friend almost lost the baby and had to go on bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy. She had a healthy baby. The scary sad part is the girl was 8 years old. Surprisingly for me, my friend went back to teaching this class. Story 18, I taught 1st grade and had a student who was in trouble so often that I had to send a daily report to his parents about his behavior. A few instances of his behavior were as follows. 1, he once tripped a kid at recess for no reason, and then began kicking him hard in the stomach. By the time I had gotten over there, he was calmly sitting on the other child's head. When I asked him why he did it, he replied, I was tired. That confused me. So I asked him what he meant by that. He said, well, I don't see any benches around. Do you? I had to sit on something too? He had a special seat at my back table, and he would mutter to himself while I was teaching. One day, I had my assistant read to the class, so I could quietly stand behind him and listen to what he was saying. All I heard was pew, pew, pew. Later, I took him aside and asked him what he was doing. He told me he was playing video games in his head and shooting everyone because kids were worth 200 points. Story 19, about 15 years ago, my mother had this little girl in her class. She's a K2 spec ed teacher. The girl's parents were both in prison, and she stayed with her grandmother. Left to her own whims at home, her grandmother would find her squatting in the kitty litter box she had pulled in front of the TV. She'd have taken in it and would stay in that third world squat position and begin to masturbate with the TV turned onto a signal-less channel with that old Blizzard effect on. A couple years later, she attempted to burn her house down, and she was officially committed. I was terrified of her. Story 20, not a teacher, but primary school is full of little shits. It's not as bad as some of the other stuff here, but this story does show how up kids are. Me and my best friend, when we were about 78, we found a whole load of woodlice in our schoolyard. At break and lunch, we would play with them, and we got obsessed with insects. Everyone thought it was super weird because we were girls, but we didn't care. Then one day, all the boys in our class had taken the blades out of their toppers, and when we went out for break, they ran ahead of us to the woodlice and just started cutting them in half. One of the lice was pregnant, and when they cut her, the babies swarmed everywhere, and the boys were just laughing as they smushed the tiny babies. Me and my friend were hysterical for the rest of the day. I get that killing insects is not as bad in people's minds as killing animals, but the way they got such pleasure from watching us try to stop them massacring the woodlice still creeps me out. Story 21, kid. I went to school with put acid in a school fish tank. Apparently got expelled from his previous school for blinding pigeons in the playground, and his next school for chasing girls around with his out. His dad was in the Russian mafia, which probably had something to do with it. Story 22, kid straight up got in a fight with my teacher in 4th grade and bit her. When she tried to use the phone to call someone, he was laughing and shitting the whole time. I thought it was funny as... Story 23, okay. I didn't witness this, but a student I taught who was a little to everyone at school. He was so abusive to his own little brother that brother slept in the bed between his parents to keep him safe. This lasted a few weeks until the family got the older boy into an inpatient facility. Never saw him again. He was 9. Story 24, I had a 3rd grader bring a pack of razor blades to school on my first day. I pulled him outside the room, sat on the railing, and said, hey, I'd like to understand why you did this. He calmly looked me in the eye and said he wanted to sharpen his pencils. I said people don't usually use razor blades to sharpen pencils, but I can think of a few reasons someone might bring razor blades to school. Maybe you wanted to hurt someone, or you were afraid someone would hurt you, or you thought they were cool and wanted to show them to your friends. He said they're to cut up my food. Still totally calm. He got suspended for 1 day. To all appearances, he was a well-adjusted, smart kid who got along with his classmates. I did notice that every time I'd try to watch him out of the corner of my eye to get some insight into his personality, he immediately noticed and started watching me out of the corner of his eye. This isn't usually the case with little kids. He could also turn his emotions on and off like flipping a light switch. He never seemed to lose control, never acted angry, never cried, would sometimes get happy for a second or two, but tended to catch himself and stop. I still have no idea what to think. Story 25. Well, at one of the schools I work at, I heard about a 9 or 10-year-old kid who would get caught masturbating in empty classrooms very often. I'm not sure of the details, but when his teacher was getting observed by someone from the district sitting in the back of her classroom, very standard routine, the kid was in the front row jerking off and giving her a strange look. I guess none of the other kids seemed to notice, although that is hard for me to believe. She ended up finishing her lesson and not saying anything to the district representative. I have no idea how it was handled after. However, come to find out, his parents were going through a divorce and his father was a cross-dresser and would bring home a lot of different men. I'm not sure if this had any effect on his behavior, but I can't imagine it was the easiest thing for him to handle. Sorry, I don't have much more information than that. Story 26. This might get buried, but last week a student in my special ed class threw an apple very hard directly at one of our paraprofessionals' head. The apple hit her hard, and I immediately called my vice principal. When the vice principal arrived, Ahe asked, "Well, you didn't mean to hit her, right?" To which he replied, "That's exactly where I was aiming. It was a good throw. I guess last year he took a razor blade and cut a classmate's leg open with it. He was sent to an alternative school for 2 months, and he ended up back at my school. Kid scares the out of me." Story 27. One day, when I was in primary school, I was sitting at my desk spacing off when one kid absolutely lost his and threw another kid into the desk in front of me and then just started beating on him, hitting him with desk chairs, etc. The strange part is that the kid who went psycho was about half the size of the kid he attacked and was just running on pure psychotic rage. I and others sitting around this just bailed out of our seats. Though several people were bruised in the crossfire, it was a pretty brutal and shocking occurrence. I don't remember what the story behind his behavior was. He was removed from a classroom several times during the year for other disruptive events, though none quite so violent, I think in middle school or so he leveled out. Story 28. I truly, honestly believe that my cousin is a psychopath from grade school on, birth on. Even when he was breastfeeding, he would bite his mom until she bled. Not your normal teething bites. It made him happy. As he got older, he would take joy in beating our mentally retarded cousin with bats. That was about ages 2 to 14. His parents would always say that it was just a phase. When he was about 5, his dad would lift his arm up and punch him as hard as he could below the armpit to toughen him up. He was later sent to military school and kicked out. When he returned home, he killed 4 stray cats, took them to the local Chinese restaurant, threw the dead cats at them, and said, "Cook him up." He's now addicted to heroin and constantly in and out of jail. I had a babysitter once that invited him over, unbeknownst to me. He left before I got back and knew about it. Soon enough, my 1-year-old started choking, and I pulled weed stems out her throat. That was a bad day for them. In waiting for the day he kills someone, it shouldn't be long now. TIL, there are way more psychopathic children in this world than I am comfortable with. Story 29. My mother works as an aide at our local public elementary school. And last year, one of her charges was a severely mentally ill 8-year-old girl. This girl's parents both had mental illnesses of some sort, and the mom did drugs while she was pregnant, which surely didn't help. As a result, the girl was clearly a very disturbed individual. She self-harmed, had the tendency to scream and run away at random times, and when she got angry, which was often, her voice would go cold as ice. "I hate you." She would say she was very intelligent, but also a pathological liar, very depressed and angry, and extremely violent sadistic. Once, she confided to my mother, "I think that the color of my blood is beautiful. Can I see your blood?" She would often throw paint-stinging insects on other students, hit and kick the teacher's aides, and attempt to kill other children who she was angry at. Fortunately, an 8-year-old girl is restrainable. Basically, she was turning out to be a textbook psychopath. Her parents even bought her a BB gun in hopes that it would help her, which is that last thing I do. My mother said she had never seen such a miserable, hate-filled little girl. Now, you'd think that surely one of the teachers would notice the girl's mental illness and intervene, but that's apparently not how it works. All of the school staff, including the principal, knew that this child did not belong in the mainstream classroom and that she desperately needed professional therapy. But legally, they could not place her in a more appropriate setting without parental consent. They can suggest things to the parents, but if the parents decide not to get treatment for the child, there's really nothing the teachers can do about it. The problem is that the mom was a mentally ill drug addict who was constantly in and out of jail, and dad, while he meant well, had a touch of autism, and refused to believe that his darling daughter was capable of such outbursts. So, although it broke the teachers' hearts that this girl's mental illness was being left untreated, they legally had no other choice but to put up with her in the mainstream classroom. Finally, after about a year of classroom disruptions, attempted escapes, and beating up teachers, the principal finally videotaped one of the girl's violent outbursts, and the father was finally convinced that his daughter needed help. With his permission, she was transferred to a special school district program where mentally ill kids can get one-on-one help without disrupting or harming the other students. I've heard that she's doing quite well there and is steadily becoming less and less violent. Hopefully, she'll continue to improve. Story 30. My mom teaches 6 to 7-year-olds and tells me all kinds of funny, weird things the kids say to one another. The one that sticks in my head, though, was one boy saying to another that if he didn't shut up, he was going to his mom. It was incredibly hard not to laugh at his choice of language of what was essentially an early yo mama insult. But nevertheless, his parents had to be brought in for a 6-year-old. That's a pretty intense thing to be talking about. Story 31. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in first grade, we had to draw a picture every day in this journal. And the one day we had substitute teacher, and I knew the teacher had to look over each drawing and would talk with the student to ask what the drawing is. So just to see her reaction, I drew a picture of a person stabbing another person. You can guess her reaction. I don't recall her telling my teacher or there being any consequences. Story 32. Just a few weeks ago, I had to sub a class consisting of just one child and his para. This kid is in 5th grade and couldn't be with any other children, had always get into some sort of physical fight with them. It didn't help that he towers over almost every other child in the school. Not only that, but he says that he is evil. Every time he writes his name on the top of the paper, he titles it evil insert name here. So not only is he physically intimidating, but he scares the out of everyone because he'll just all of a sudden screech or mutter evil scenarios to himself. When he couldn't have computers the day I was with him, his para borrowed a laptop from another teacher so he could play on a website he enjoyed, wound up not going to that website at all. Instead, he went to Google and typed in evil, thoroughly enjoying everything that popped up. Overall, he freaked me out, and I'm curious to see how he'll progress in life. Story 33. A kid in my kindergarten class ate my glue stick once that my sister-in-law taught a 5-year-old who killed a bunch of baby chicks that the class was raising. Apparently, he thought it was hilarious, especially when all the other kids cried about it. Parents came in for a meeting, and they thought it was funny too. That was his last day at the school. Story 34. A girl in my primary school was rather infamously cruel to animals and other people. In year 6, she managed to catch a squirrel. No one could work out how she caught the thing and basically tortured it to death to show off to a boy she thought was cool, who being 10, ran off and told everyone but a teacher. It filtered through to the school staff soon enough, and she disappeared for a couple days and then immediately came back exactly the same, but angry about something. She left and went to a different secondary school to me after that, so I didn't see anything. But rumors that filtered out from her all-girls school to our mixed one tell me she led a life of repeatedly bullying girls to near suicide and basically beating and berating every one of her near continuous stream of boyfriends for nearly all of secondary school until she was put into a young offenders institute a couple miles away at 16 for ABH or GBH. Can't remember which. Story 35. Am not a teacher, but a friend of mine is a foster mom and has adopted a few of her foster kids. She has 8 legal children now. The oldest is 25 and the youngest are 2. Last month, she took in a new foster kid, Kenny, who was 9 and liked to style people's hair and play with Barbies. Not too big of a deal, but she learned from the kid that he tried to kill himself by running away from school and getting onto a highway, tried to overdose his little brother with his own medication, and stab his mother with a pair of scissors multiple times. All this was confirmed by his previous foster parents. Within a week of having him at her house, the foster mom was getting reports from school that Kenny was masturbating in front of other kids in his class, flashing teachers, peeing on other people, threatening rape what the actual, and kept asking the teachers to shoot him. He was placed in special ED classes and was in intense therapy, but the mom drew the line when Kenny came to school and told the teachers that he was planning to cut open the throats of his foster parents and siblings that night. Then he took a shaving razor out of his pocket and said that's what he planned on using. The kid is in a mental hospital now. I feel really bad for him since he had a history of and physical abuse, and he was only 9. Story 36. I had a student a few years ago that may actually be the second coming of Jesus. She was 6 years old, and since she was 4, she had been saying she was Jesus. Family was not religious crackpots. I did several home visits during my year with her. She would say things all the time. As the year went on, she kept getting more and more intense about it. I was the only one who didn't tell her to just shut up. I questioned her and let her talk, never told her she was right or wrong. Anyway, one day at recess, she climbed up on some pipes and started shouting things about the devil is coming. He will throw those who are not prepared into anguish. Yada, yada, yada. I was called, and we had a parent meeting, and I convinced them to take her to a religious leader to have a talk. The religious leader spoke to her for a while, and I will never forget what he said, "Little girl, ooh boy, do I hope you're making this up. But I really don't know." Her parents decided to heavily medicate her for a few years, and then take her off and see if she still thought she was the second coming. She was taken out of the school the next year. I think about her often. Story 37. I was a preschool teacher a few years ago in a toddler room, 2-year-olds, and there was this adorable kid, very smart, but psycho. I had to fill out an average of 3 incident reports a day on him that had to be signed by a parent when he was picked up at the end of the day, and they just shrugged or made him apologize, which did nothing to deter him. This kid's father was in and out of jail for assault and drug-related charges, and his mom was pretty much useless. He told me on several occasions, while holding a toy broom, that he was going to beat me with the broom until I bled and cried. He often attacked other kids for no reason. He used to tell one of the little girls that he was going to her. He called all teacher when he was upset. Basically, this kid was nuts. I brought up the issues to my manager and the owner several times, and they did nothing. So after 6 months of being this kid's punching bag and have my legs and arms covered in bruises and scratches, I quit. I didn't give any notice. I walked into the office, told them I quit, and then grabbed my GTFO. Story 38. The most concerning student I ever knew wasn't one of my current students, but someone that I went to school with. When we were in 6th grade, he kind of broke down one day and climbed into school's air shaft. He ended up in the ceiling. I have no idea how this works. Please don't ask me to explain, and threw a ceiling tile at our pregnant music teacher, and she miscarried. Eventually, the SWAT team, or at least that's what someone told me, came in and retrieved him. He was pulled from school the remainder of that year, and all throughout 7th grade. He came back in 8th grade and had another episode that involved him trying to throw a heavy textbook at the belly of our pregnant science teacher. I guess he really didn't like pregnant ladies. He never came back to school again. Story 39. I used to be a day camp counselor. This one kid was seriously disturbed. Would have him sit in timeout before swim time, and Head whisper how he planned on killing me. Head regularly hit the other kids and introduced a lot of topics to the girls. We did look into abuse. Turns out his parents dealt with him by letting him play GTA all the time, would have to chase after him sometimes. He ended up biting me and one other counselor when we managed to get him back on camp property. By the rules of the camp, he should have been removed by the 2nd week. However, there was some clause about not excluding children with disorders. They never told us what he was diagnosed with, but the running theory rumor was juvenile bipolar. In that case, I feel bad for him. But they should have been allowed to tell us what it was so we could make the environment safer for him and the kids in his group. The 16 to 18-year-old staff was not trained to deal with any of that. Story 40. When I was a kid, I did a lot of odd stuff like this. I got sent to the counselor for drawing people being killed. I set things on fire, and oddly enough, I wet the bed until I was around 11 years old. I can actually remember the first time I wanted to hurt someone. I saw a girl fall off a slide and cry in pain. I felt the sudden urge to attack her. I didn't do it, of course, but it's a very strong memory. It kind of felt the same as my first time noticing the opposite. I once dismembered my Stretch Armstrong doll and hid it. I would periodically visit the limbs, head, and torso, which I had neatly arranged in a box. I told a friend this story when I was 20, and hearing his reaction made me realize this stuff wasn't normal. As an adult, I was able to get into competitive fighting to channel my urges and form constructive relationships with violence. Growing up, my dad was a severe alcoholic, but my mom was a saint. I can only think what happens to people who are like me, who had 2 shitty parents. Story 41. I'm a daycare teacher, not primary school, but this girl is about 8 and has a whole mess of issues. Starts out with little things like not listening and getting into teacher supplies, dumping toys out and refusing to clean up, typical douchebag child stuff. But then it turns into physically shoving, fighting the teachers who try to stop her, screaming at the top of her lungs, accusing everyone of staring at her and laughing at her. I've several times had to separate her from the younger kids because she likes to hold them in her lap, hug on them too much, pull up their shirts and stuff. She masturbates in class by rubbing her legs together, and she does it all day, and then she screams at the kids asking her why she's all red and sweaty. It's disgusting, and CPS was already called once. She's finally going to school for kids with behavioral problems, of course. Now, her 3-year-old sister is starting to do the same things. Ugh.